Samsung, Micron, and Texas Instruments have real fabs under construction, several ahead of schedule. But the honest read of the construction data is that we have yet to achieve a real broad reshoring. And this is an industry in which time is everything. It means that Taiwanese investors are paying about 10% more on their investments in tax than Korean investors.
우리는 보통 미국을 기술과 자본이 전부 모이는 곳이라고 생각합니다. 그런데 정작 미국 의회 청문회에서는 조금 다른 이야기가 나옵니다. 공장을 짓거나 전기를 공급하는 속도가 생각보다 너무 느려서 걱정이라는 하소연이 나오고 있거든요. 그 와중에 삼성 공장 같은 사례는 오히려 예정보다 빠르다는 말까지 나옵니다. 미국 내부에서 지금 어떤 고민을 하고 있는지 그 속내를 들여다보겠습니다.
We're even hearing reports of China-linked groups using American AI to spread misinformation about anti-data center content. Their intent is clear. China will use any means necessary to undermine American AI and other key American industries so that they, not the United States, will lead the world's future. The Biden administration's and congressional Democrats' misguided Inflation Reduction Act played into China's hands, greatly expanding their tax credits for wind and solar with the ultimate aim of phasing out American fossil fuels. China quickly exploited these tax credits, setting up factories in the United States to build their solar panels here. To compete with and win against China in these key areas, the U.S. economy needs firm legislative support. With the passage of H.R. 1, the Working Families Tax Cut Act, Republicans ended the Biden-era climate slush funds and provided key support for the U.S. economy. H.R. 1 stopped China from benefiting from our tax provisions, prohibiting foreign entities of concern from eligibility. The bill included key provisions to support expansion of our reliable domestic fossil fuel production, bolstering American energy dominance. The bill also provided $7.5 billion to expand the United States domestic critical minerals capacity, which is essential for the development of American AI and semiconductors and much more. China has been aggressively accelerating its shipbuilding, leveraging its critical minerals chokehold and taking punitive measures against American businesses. But H.R. 1 has strengthened our hand against China directly by addressing many of those concerns. Our founding fathers, 250 years ago, understood that people are endowed by God with unalienable rights or unalienable rights, and that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. But the Chinese Communist Party views individual rights as granted by and subordinate to the will of the party. If the United States loses its economic competition with China, the Chinese Communist Party will leverage its economic victory to impose that ideology in a form of oppression all.
미국이 이렇게 다급하게 법을 바꾸고 체질을 고치려는 이유, 바로 중국의 속도 때문입니다. 나라 전체가 하나의 계획표처럼 움직이는 중국의 방식의 위기감을 느끼고 있는 거죠. 그 격차가 얼마나 큰지 구체적인 숫자로 나옵니다.
China is pursuing a comprehensive, long-term strategy to create levers of control and to dominate future technology, data, economics, and manufacturing. China regularly competes as an ecosystem. Today, the United States is winning on the economic fundamentals when it comes to innovation, capital markets, productivity, but losing on coordination and on speed. If the status quo continues, they are likely to catch up or surpass the United States within the next 3 years or less on a number of critical sectors. That's why we appreciate your time today and the work you're currently doing in Congress. It's the finding of the U.S.-China Commission that the topics are increasingly intertwined and should be treated as national security issues that are fundamental to address. The Commission has made a number of recommendations on this front, and we'll provide those to your staff. It's for this reason that H.R. 1 and the provisions included within are incredibly timely and impactful on supply chain specifics. The work that was taken by Congress last year set the stage for the United States catching up and reversing past mistakes that put us on a collision course to fall behind with China. The legislation is both necessary and substantial, and Congress should consider follow-on actions to expand it into a more systemic, competitive approach. China has determined it does not need to out-invent America to win. It seeks instead to control materials we build with and slow down what we build and to use our tools against us. In 2025, for the first time, China revealed it is willing to use its levers for geopolitical purposes. The world watched as that lever of rare earth minerals was pulled so that China could rebalance the negotiating table in its favor. That strategy is on full display. Control the inputs, use that control, and where it can't control, seek to delay or influence American perception. Just as you referenced in your opening testimony, sir, the OpenAI just documented a China-linked campaign amplifying opposition to American data centers. This reveals that Beijing sees a decision line that matters. It shows the CCP's influence is active here at home. The intent is to slow down the U.S. ecosystem. Every month, a fab, a data center, or processing facility doesn't get built in America is a month that China gains ground. For our side of the competition, it's simple to state and hard to execute. We have to build better, deploy faster, and secure the arteries that feed vital sectors across the United States. I look forward to the discussion today. I'll keep my comments.
중국이 밀어붙이는 힘이 무서운 건 사실입니다. 그래서 미국도 보조금을 쏟아부으며 공장들을 다시 불러 모으고 있죠. 겉으로 보기엔 화려한 복귀 같지만 실상을 뜯어보면 이야기가 조금 다릅니다.
In China. The CCP is pursuing a carefully planned and choreographed military-style campaign in which Beijing identifies goals, establishes the policy frameworks, and then mobilizes eye-popping resources in a whole-of-state effort that seeks to align government at every level, financial markets, industry, academia, and the military to achieve its goals. I'm not sure the U.S. has ever operated in a comparable way short of the temporary emergency of World War II. That asymmetry is part of the problem. China now accounts for roughly 29% of global manufacturing, against about 16% for the United States. It leads in solar, batteries, EVs, and shipbuilding outright. In semiconductors, the hardest case, self-sufficiency, has moved from roughly a third of domestic demand to about half of domestic demand in the past 2 years. The National IC Fund alone has directed roughly $150 billion into the semiconductor sector. That's 3 times what Chips and Science allocated. And individual provinces and cities have provided billions more. Without concerted action by the U.S. and its allies, China may soon dominate the market for many industrially critical mature node applications, which would give it leverage akin to what it has today over rare earths. The Nexperia case last year, which threatened the chip supply for global automakers, was a wake-up call. The newly adopted 15th Five-Year Plan doubles down on this model, animated by an even starker assessment in China of the need to unlock indigenous technological innovation and de-risk from a United States that is seen as intent on subverting China's rise.
생산 규모를 늘리려 했지만 아직 기대만큼 따라오지 못하고 있는 상황입니다. 설계 능력은 좋지만 그걸 실제로 구현할 전력망이나 행정 속도가 부족한 탓이죠. 대체 어떤 문제가 발목을 잡고 있는 걸까요?
The fittest will survive. BYD, the global electric vehicle giant, exemplifies this process. Yes, it has benefited from myriad kinds of state support, but it has also been tempered by intense domestic competition and produces world-class products as a result. Walling ourselves off from such products cannot be the extent of our strategy. At best, this buys time. We either find a way to compete with China as it is, or cede one industry after another to it and lose our self-determination. Fortunately, the U.S. is not standing still. We are reshoring. The headline numbers are encouraging. TSMC, Samsung, Micron, and Texas Instruments have real fabs under construction, several ahead of schedule. But the honest read of the construction data is that we have yet to achieve a real broad reshoring boom. Spending is actually down from its 2024 peak, even as demand explodes. The task now is converting those funded announcements into qualified shipping volume and extending support past the fab into the materials, tools, and packaging layer, where China's control is arguably greater and deeper. Energy dominance. This is fast becoming the actual constraint on everything else. AI data centers could account for close to a fifth of new U.S. electricity demand by 2030. And that demand is now competing directly with the electrified factories we're trying to reshore. The policy answer has to be genuinely all of the above. Nuclear, gas, transmission build-out, faster permitting, financed in a way that doesn't simply push the cost onto residential taxpayers. Rare earths and critical minerals. The Pentagon's equity stake in MP Materials with a 10-year price floor and guaranteed offtake for its new magnet facility is the right template. It treats material security as an industrial policy problem, not a trade remedy problem. We need similar actions at multiple sites and paired with processing capacity in the US, Australia, and Japan, because mining without separation and refining capacity solves only half of our dependency on China. Fortunately, the WFTCA is a powerful step in the right direction across all of these domains. Its capital cost provisions are well designed and producing real measurable reductions in the after-tax cost building of semiconductor, pharmaceutical, and mineral processing capacity on U.S. soil. I therefore end upbeat. We're turning a corner, and now we as Americans must all row harder and in sync, because China is. And I welcome your questions and discussion. Thank you.
결국 실행 속도가 문제입니다. 아이디어를 얼마나 빨리 실제 공장으로 옮기느냐가 승패를 가르는데 정작 미국은 자기들이 만든 복잡한 규제에 갇혀 있습니다. 실제 사례를 보면 더 심각합니다.
So point number one is China's chief advantage over the U.S. in energy and everything else is far greater industrial freedom. So we're often taught that, well, China has an advantage because they're willing to spend more, they're willing to dictate things. But America has proven in the past that by far the best quote-unquote industrial policy is freedom with property rights. So to give you a sense of how powerful this is, in the 1870s, the first long-distance pipeline built in the U.S., the Tidewater pipeline, went from conception to completion safely in 6 months. You cannot do that with a yoga studio or upgrading a yoga studio in America today. So what's happened is not that we're too free and we need to adopt anti-freedom things in any way, it's that we are radically less free than China. Basically, your ability to build things is overwhelmingly a function of how quickly you can go from idea to execution. In the United States, our entire permitting system makes that basically impossible. And so if we're at all serious about being a country in the future, competing with China, et cetera, we need
자유를 강조하는 나라인데 정작 공장 짓는 일에는 그 자유가 작동하지 않는 역설적인 상황입니다. 이제는 지원금을 주는 수준을 넘어 행정 전반을 뜯어 고쳐야 한다는 목소리가 나옵니다. 특히 전력 공급 문제는 인공지능 시대의 치명적인 약점이 됩니다.
Now we have a more contentious one for today's Republicans, permitting certainty. The idea that once you get a permit, it should be a real permit. It should be final. Presidents love to deny permitting certainty. So we had Biden killing twin metals, killing oil and gas projects. Now President Trump likes to use it to stop wind. Both parties have to recognize that you cannot be a real country if the president can revoke permits at will. We need permitting certainty. It should be bipartisan. So, number one is China's chief advantage over the U.S. is far greater industrial freedom. If we don't at minimum radically reform NEPA, Clean Water Act, and have permitting certainty in permitting legislation, we've got a very short shot clock right now, or a very short clock to do that, you can't seriously talk about competing with China. Okay, number two is China is expanding its reliable power by building new coal plants. So there's a mythology that China is winning because on industrial electricity because they're adopting solar. So this is a misunderstanding of what is happening. If you look at China, they're always building new coal plants. They have a lot of coal plants in the pipeline, and they're using a lot of solar at the same time. So what's happening here? What they're using the coal plants for is reliable power, what you can call capacity. So the ability to generate electricity when needed in the exact quantity needed. Baseload is actually not quite the right term, but what you really need is just dispatchable, reliable power, whether it's baseload or it's flexible. Because when you have a peak event like Storm Fern, you don't just need the baseload, you need the flexible peak power. And what we saw during Storm Fern is something I've said for years, which is solar and wind can go near zero at any given time. So solar and wind, this is point three, do have a use, and China is making use of it, but they're not using it as reliable power. They're using it as a fuel saver for reliable power. So solar and wind, you should not think of as real power sources. You should think of them as fuel savers. When the sun shines and the wind blows, you can save gas, you can save coal. And in countries with really expensive fuel, that can make a lot of sense. Now, guess what? The United States does not have really expensive fuel, so most of our solar and wind is a complete just burning of money and harming our grid. But in general, we should be open to solar and wind when the fuel savings outweigh the cost of the panels and turbines, of the transmission and the distribution, which again in the US is rarely the case and would be even rarer if we had good permitting policy. But with China, it makes more sense because they don't have all the same domestic resources. And for solar, they're not only saving fuel with solar, but they have the solar industry where they're making quite a bit of money selling us solar panels that we're way overspending on. Okay, so their advantage is industrial freedom, that's point one. Point two is they're expanding the reliable power through new coal plants. Number three is they're using solar as a fuel saver for reliable power, not reliable power itself, and they're selling it to us.
미국의 강점은 새로운 것을 발명하는 능력입니다. 그런데 그 혁신을 실제 제품으로 찍어낼 제조 기반이 약해진 게 문제입니다. 과연 이 능력을 다시 되찾을 수 있을지 의원이 짚어내는 결정적인 걸림돌이 있습니다.
Number four, and this relates to the big beautiful bill, America's attempt to use solar as a reliable power source via subsidies and mandates has been a total disaster. So we have preferred solar in all these different ways. We've subsidized it. Fortunately, the new subsidies at least have come to an end. We still have 10 years more of some of the wind subsidies in the pipeline, so we didn't kill enough of those, but still, it's a lot better. But we're doing that. The markets don't impose any penalty for unreliability, so we have huge problems with electricity markets, and many states still mandate large amounts of solar and wind through what are called renewable portfolio standards. So we have all of these preferences. And what are these, and at the same time, we have all these punishments on fossil fuels. So what happens? We are artificially lowering the supply of reliable electricity, and at the same time, we're artificially increasing the demand through electrification, and now we have this huge organic demand from AI. So I was warning of an electricity crisis before the AI era. Now it's just totally, totally dire. So we need to abandon this idea of subsidizing, mandating intermittent fuel savers. We shouldn't be subsidizing or mandating anything, but certainly not things that aren't reliable. And what do we need? And this is point five. We need a radical increase in industrial freedom. And the two areas I'd point to are one, tech-neutral permitting reform, so every kind of technology is much, much easier to permit in the ways I laid out. And we need tech-neutral electricity policy that values reliability and properly devalues unreliability. And if we do this, we have a real chance of being a serious country that's growing and can meet the AI opportunity, which is not only a security issue, I think it is the chance for the greatest improvement in human life since fossil fuels caused the energy revolution. So happy to talk about that as well.
결국 다시 전력과 허가 문제로 돌아옵니다. 아주 오래전부터 가능했던 쉬운 일인데도 지금의 미국은 서류 뭉치와 규제 때문에 헤매고 있습니다. 인공지능의 미래가 이 전력망 하나에 달려있다는 경고입니다.
Sure. So, Mr. Epstein, in specifically talking about permitting, and of course you could take this anywhere you'd like, but will the United States ever be able to outcompete China manufacturing when we continue to make it harder to build mines and factories and refineries here at home? And what are the biggest regulatory reforms Congress can make to help American manufacturers compete with China?
I think we need...
Yeah, and I will say, if everyone could, when you talk, use your mic, because we're broadcasting this.
Gotcha.
And we will be clipping it for...
Gotcha. Also, I apologize in advance. I'm going to need to leave fairly soon, so I'm not disgusted or mad or something like that, or trying to be rude. But yeah, I mean, I think we need to recognize just how hard it is to do things here versus China, assuming the Chinese government wants something. Now, the best is if you have real freedom, so it doesn't really matter what the government wants, but the Chinese government wants a lot of industrial activity, and so people are relatively free to do it, and we're not. If you look at the realms where we do have a lot of industrial freedom, say in particular oil and gas production in the United States, where it's largely a state permitting process, and where, say, Texas, you can have a pretty thin permit in terms of sheets of paper versus New Mexico or the federal government, you see that we can, I mean, that's in a sense a kind of manufacturing, right? So we see that when we do have the industrial freedom, we can do it. The federal permitting regime is so bad that even if we make all the reforms that I'm advocating in permitting reform, we're still going to be much less industrially free than China, but we'll be much more industrially free than we are today. So we're going to need to do that. I do think
반도체 공장 하나 짓는데 허가 서류만 1000건이 넘는다니 말 그대로의 상황입니다. 속도가 생명인 산업에서 이런 행정 처리는 치명적일 수밖에 없죠. 여기에 더해 미국이 언급하는 또 다른 기준이 나옵니다.
Before you leave, how does energy and our resources tie into data centers and looking at the benefits of AI?
Well, it's the same. One is you just need to look at them the same way, so you need to look at positives and negatives with both of them. But what we're seeing with data centers and AI is that the biggest bottleneck that we face in particular is electricity supply. Like the US is always better at what they call going from what Peter Thiel calls from going 0 to 1, like inventing something, because we have the most freedom in terms of mental freedom in our thinking. So we invent things, but China's much better at stealing them and scaling them, and in part because we don't have the industrial freedom. So what we're finding is we're really good at designing chips. we're really good at designing models, and we're freer to do those things than people are in China. But we're not leaving ourselves to free electricity, even though producing electricity is incredibly easy. Like, Edison figured this out. It's very easy, right? You just take reliable sources of fuel, you build power plants, you build some power lines, like super easy to do. So, but the whole permitting system has ruined this and made it difficult. So basically, if we can deconstrain our electricity grid, and a good place to start is by allowing these AI data centers to build their own power, which can power them and contribute to the grid, and be free of a lot of these other permitting things. That's a good start. So AI is existential for the country, energy is existential for the country, and energy is existential for AI.
대만 기업이 겪는 세금 불이익을 말하면서 한국 투자자가 가진 조건을 함께 언급합니다. 미국 입장에서 한국의 투자 조건이 이미 하나의 중요한 참고점이 되어 있다는 뜻입니다.
Makes sense.
Sorry, I need to leave.
Thank you, Alex.
And just to put a fine point on the opportunities that he was talking about, this is happening right now. This is real. There are countries overseas, companies overseas that are building these tools on American AI systems that are providing services on healthcare, on rideshare, on biotechnology, on education. So it's happening right now. It's not a theoretical thing. One of the things that's lacking is in the US, we're still sort of looking at this as like, should we engage in this, should we not engage in this? So the point he raised on sort of those opportunities existing are very much present, but we're being hindered here in the US by the regulatory regime.
I wonder if I could pull on a thread that Alex raised at the very beginning, and that is sort of the thicket of federal permitting. If we could imagine solving that, it does not get us where we need to be because so much of the challenge is at the state and local level as well. And so equal attention has to be paid there. When TSMC tried to open its fab in Chandler, Arizona, it had to file over 1,000 permitting applications, many of which were at the state and local level. And this is an industry in which time is everything.
But they could, at the end of the day though, like you could have a situation like we had with Delaware becoming the safe haven for every banking industry. So you could have certainly, data centers and AI could basically be attracted to those states that are friendly. Right?
And that's exactly what we want, absolutely. Now, if we could take something that you've started here with HR 1 and make it even better, there is, and this relates to the permitting, the 45X tax credits phase out in 2034. That's an 8-year window. Some of these projects, particularly in critical minerals, unless we can solve the permitting very quickly, may not actually be viable within that time frame. And so extending the tax credit a little further changes the economic calculus tremendously for some of these projects that have to navigate complex regulatory environments and still deliver on the things we want them to do. So that's really important. And then there's a second piece, which is critical to establishing our competitiveness and onshoring in semiconductors. And that is a piece of the original bill that did not make it into reconciliation, and that's the Taiwan Double Taxation Relief Act. I just came back from Taiwan, where I've spoken to critical stakeholders across their semiconductor industry. And they're investing here, and they want to invest more, but currently there's a double taxation penalty, which means that Taiwanese investors are paying about 10% more on their investments in tax than Korean investors. It disadvantages them. These are exactly the people we want to bring to the United States. So making sure that piece of legislation moves forward, I think, would be just a vital extra arrow in our quiver that would get us the reshoring that we want faster.
And if I may, I think that it's not just Korea, but China has that advantage too. Yeah. So we deny Taiwan what we give China. So this is something that should be addressed. I wholeheartedly agree with Glenn's assessment.
I would also agree with that, and I would say in addition to extending that time frame on those credits, one of the things the Commission has recommended is expanding that to other sectors, such as quantum computing, biotechnology, and other areas.
오늘 미국 하원 청문회 영상을 보며 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 엄청난 자본을 가진 나라가 정작 공장 짓는 속도나 전력 문제로 고민하는 모습이 참 낯설게 느껴집니다. 예전엔 우리가 미국의 시스템을 배우려 애썼지만 이제는 우리의 제조 능력과 실행력이 그들에게 하나의 사례가 되고 있습니다. 묵묵히 실력을 쌓아온 제조 역량이 지금의 대한민국을 만든 진짜 힘이 아닐까 싶습니다. 이것이야말로 우리가 생각한 것보다 대한민국이 더 커졌다는 증거이자 우리의 진짜 저력일 겁니다. 오늘 영상을 보며 시청자 여러분들은 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 오늘 영상은 여기까지입니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다.